common? They were born in 1967. That's irrelevant, really, except 1967 is kind of an important day, or important year for us, and at least in the life of this church. Petland, Ralph Lauren, Ryland Homes, also companies you've probably heard of, all began in 1967. Do you guys remember the number one movie that happened in September 1967? In the Heat of the Night, Sidney Poitier, right? The number one song, September 1967, was by a band I've never heard of called the Box Tops. Did you guys ever hear of them? Any hands? Yeah, there's a few of them. It was called The Letter. Green Bay Packers won the Super Bowl, St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series, and the Philadelphia 76ers won the NBA championship. A lot happened in 1967. Vietnam War was going on. Civil rights movement was continuing. Israel, kind of unique, kind of an interesting situation, defeated the Arab nations in the Six-Day War. Maybe you've heard of that, and it's kind of almost kind of freaky, right? Because what's going on right now, that's hard, and we look on from a distance, and we're trying to figure out all the answers and trying to know what's going on today, right? A lot happened 56 years ago, but one of the main reasons that we are here today is talk about Southview. Southview started in 1967. The district wanted a church, a Wesleyan church, on the south side of Indianapolis. So they bought the land, and they started building a building in the summer of 67. It's interesting because they built the building not actually having a congregation. You know what that makes me think of? Field of Dreams. Right? Build it, and they will come. I love that movie. It was a great movie. In fact, we used to live in Iowa. We lived about an hour plus, give or take, from that place, and we visited multiple times. When family or friends came, we took them there because it's a big place. Everybody's seen that movie and have been impacted by that place. But to be able to walk out of the corn, right? Like Kevin Costner, when he was playing that role, it's obvious that he was a farmer. He was checking out the land, and he heard this voice, build it, and they will come. He was one day looking out his window, and he saw this field, this baseball field, and it continued to say in his ear, build it, and they will come. And so the movie is trying to figure out what and why and how are they going to be able to do this. This poor Iowa farmer that really doesn't have a lot of money, but he feels compelled to build this baseball field. He doesn't know why or how, but then he realizes it's all about his father. There's something about it. Build it, and they will come. But the district was thinking the same way. This district was thinking, build it, and they will come, long before the movie even came out. Right? I've heard of many methods of starting a church, but I've never heard a district buying land and building a building. Craig Rochelle, pastor of Life Church, maybe you've heard of him. One of the biggest churches in the nation. He actually started in his garage. He got the metal like folding chairs that probably many of us have in our homes and things like that. Put them up in the garage, and people came. I heard of Chris Hodges, who started prayer groups in his home, in his living room. I heard of Eugene Peterson. Have you ever heard of Eugene Peterson? He's the one that did the Message paraphrase. And he started in a basement, in his home basement. Matt Smith, a friend of mine, planted a church in North Carolina. He started in a middle school auditorium. This is a little bit more normal for church plants, right? But he started in a middle school. They moved into high school, and now they took over an old grocery store and are about 1,000 plus people. Alex Hershey, another friend of mine, is on the west side in Avon. He uses the YMCA. They planted about 10 years ago, and I believe it's either this week or next week celebrating 10 years. They're still in the YMCA purposely. They decided not to build a different direction. You know, really what all it takes, though, is faith. It takes a lot of faith to build a building when you have no congregation. It takes a lot of faith to plant a church. No matter where you plant it, it takes a lot of faith to be able to do it. And Southview is here because of faith. The faith of a lot of people that came before us. The district took a chance. And we should never forget their faith. Because they built a building, they hired a pastor, they just needed a congregation. And eventually, they would show up. September 16th, 1967, a week before the launch of the church, there was a group of professors from Indiana Wesleyan, then Marian College, that came down and they helped canvass the neighborhood. 800 homes, I heard. 800 homes. They went around and passed out all these pamphlets. And that next week, on September 24th, 1967, Southview Wesleyan Church launched right over there on the other side of this building with 80 people in attendance. There were 13 families from the community in that attendance on top of some other people that came from out of town, probably some of the same professors that came from Indiana Wesleyan. But a year later, 11 of those families were still attending the church, which is pretty crazy. It's pretty dramatic to have 11 of 13 families in the community to still be attending the church from the first day of launch, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. I found a document that, and this is what the district wrote. The church was designed, financed, and constructed on this convenient site, I like that, convenient site, to proclaim the Word of God in Metro Indy, to win souls for Christ in this and the surrounding areas. And I love that, right? And we still have that desire today, right? To proclaim the Word of God and to win souls for Christ. We say it a little bit differently. We actually just came up with kind of a new vision statement, building a team to love, live, and serve like Jesus. And honestly, there's nothing better to devote our time or energy to, right? Our lives to, nothing better, right? To Jesus and trying to be like Him and to be able to share it with our community. Psalm 145, verses 1 through 7, is a psalm written by King David. He says, I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. They speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty. And I will meditate on your wonderful works. They tell of the power of your awesome works, and I will proclaim your great deeds. They celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing of your righteousness. I love that. I love that passage. There's something about worship when you lift up your praise to God like He hears it. And when King David says this, I love the words he says. He starts with, I will exalt you, right? Lifting Him up. He's making much of Jesus. When we make much of Jesus, nothing is better, right? That's our goal in life, is to make much of Jesus and to have the world hear it, to hear the world proclaim that we love God. Every day I will praise you, right? Every day it should be something that just dwells within our hearts and our bones and just comes out of us all the time, right? It's also a declaration too, not just an exaltation of God, but also a declaration of humility on David's part, right? You are good, you are exalted, but I'm down here. Like, I'm human. I'm imperfect, right? It's a declaration of humility. King David knows who he is. He knows where God has brought him from, right? Because he started out as a shepherd, a little boy, taking care of sheep, and eventually became a king. There's something about that. And David, I feel like, is reflecting a little bit, because this is probably something near the end of his life. It's something that he's looking at, the goodness of God and all the things that God has done in his life and in his heart, and he's reflecting on that goodness. Because David knows where he started out as a shepherd boy, right? Can you imagine being a little boy taking care of all these sheep? And then you get called in, and you're kind of nervous because this guy, Samuel, is here. And he's supposed to anoint the new or future king of Israel. And he's probably heard already that all his brothers were overpicked, right? Like, they weren't the ones. But then when he comes in, they say, yes, you're the one. You're going to be anointed. You are the future king of Israel. Wow, can you imagine? He's a little boy taking care of sheep. And now he's going to be the future king of Israel. David knows he would not be in this situation if it were not for God. David is a story of faith, from small boy who grew into one of the strongest warriors, a man after God's own heart, to eventually become a king. But the thing is, he didn't start as king, and even when he was anointed king, he had a long process to go. He had a long process to go because he wasn't ready to be a king there, right? So God started testing him and using him and trying to figure out what he is made of. So he kept him as a shepherd. He kept him as a shepherd, taking care of sheep, because there's something about taking care of sheep that is so important to the life of David. He would learn a lot of stuff taking care of these sheep, because one, they needed protection. What would happen when the lion and that bear came around, right? He had that slingshot and he took care of them. And it would be a future test of what was going to happen, right? Because the thing is about David, he did not start off fighting giants. He started off fighting a lion and a bear. He took care of them, and God grew his faith because of that. David defended the sheep and the bear, or sheep from the bear and the lion, and his faith grew some more, and God gave him favor. God took care of him and said, here, I'm going to give you a little bit more responsibility. And I think when we realize that we're a lot like David, then things like that will happen. That God will grow our faith, that God will give us favor, and that God will give us more responsibility because he can trust us. The thing is, sometimes, a lot like David, we kind of get a little sidetracked. We get a little distracted. David did too, right? He got big time distracted. He went up to that rooftop and was looking out, and he's like, I want that. Called her up, right? He had the affair, got her pregnant, and eventually covered up her husband's death, right? Like, he was struggling. He was distracted. He messed up. He sinned. And guess what? God sent in a prophet, specifically named Nathan, who used him to get David back on track. And so David repented, and we get Psalm 51 out of it, right? Purify my heart, O God. Clean my heart, O God. And renew a right fast spirit within me. Like, David messed up, but he got back on track because, right, he's a man after God's own heart, and you need to continue to get to that place. But the thing is, things like that don't happen without repercussion. Things changed. Things changed for him. His kingdom got smaller. The baby died, right? All these things happened. But God continued to use him. David was just an ordinary guy doing some ordinary things. But he said yes to God, and he continued to say yes to God. And God continued to bless him and use him. The thing is, God uses the ordinary to do extraordinary things. Have extraordinary faith. And when we live with an extraordinary faith, God can do amazing and abundant things. And I think Southview has done this a lot over the years, right? Of course, we talked about planning a church with no congregation, right? Southview had brought in a pastor with no funding, right? He had no idea how he was going to get paid because he was brought in by the district. Eventually, they would hire a guy from Ohio, but I think you came from Michigan, right? No, was it? Never wore any blue? Oh, for sure. But when he pulled into the driveway, as he said last week, he knew it was the last church he would ever pastor. That's extraordinary faith. That is. That's extraordinary faith. And God continues to use ordinary people that have extraordinary faith. It was extraordinary faith that brought this building. Added on when no one knew exactly how it would be used. Like shooting three-pointers, right? On Monday, but now Sunday nights, right? To reach a group of people that would have no other reason to step in foot of a church. But building those relationships, building those connections, but also to be able to baptize. But also able to worship and sing praises to our King, right? Also to eat food, right? We have tables today, not because we sit like this now, but because eventually we're going to have food at these tables. And it's going to be a good thing, a multi-purpose facility that can be used for so many things like an art fair or something like that. There's so many things and different connections that people have here, like weddings. How many weddings have we had in this facility? Good celebrations, but also some hard times too. We've had funerals in this place. We've cried in this place, right? Like hard times have happened in this place, but God continues to use ordinary people with extraordinary faith, and I believe that's a very good description of what Southview is. Faith always involves action, and that is extraordinary faith. And I believe Southview, even though we've had 56 years of history, I believe we still have a lot more to do. We have a lot more future, a lot more good things in store for it. And I believe Southview is actually heading into a really good season. And I'm confident today, I'm optimistic today, that Southview's best days are ahead. No offense to any of the days that happened before, but I believe that Southview's best days are still ahead of us. And I'll be the first to admit I didn't always think that way. I didn't. We've had a couple rough years here, coming out of COVID, with different things happening here and there. I wasn't always confident, but over the last few weeks and few months and even a year, a lot of good things have happened. And it's been really cool to see. I feel like God's presence has been alive again. I feel like we've been able to recognize God's provision a little bit more and experience God's protection over the last few months. And we've become a little bit more thankful, and I hope we've been able to support each other a little bit more. I think we are realizing a little bit more what it actually means to be obedient and set apart to God in this world. And I believe that we're realizing a little bit more about what it is to be radiant, to reflect God to the world. Like I said earlier, we're building a team here at Southview to love, live, and serve like Jesus, because He is worth it. He is everything. He is our first. He is our central. He is our everything here at Southview. And God is growing and building our faith. And I'm praying for God's favor on this church. A couple years ago, we started serving over at a food pantry at Faith UCC, and I feel like that strengthened our faith. Last year, we started helping out with a dinner church over in Garfield Park with Trinity Wesleyan, and I believe that's built our faith even more. And I'm praying for more God-sized responsibilities to be taken on. Last summer, we did art camp, a for kids, kind of a VBS type style. And I believe that God used us to impact a lot of people during that event. And it was just so good to see our church come together and do that. And I believe we're in the beginning stages over the next year or so, stepping out in faith to reach our community for Christ even more. God's put Willow Glen Apartments on my heart, and I've been praying for that place for the last few months. But I believe in the next year He's really going to utilize that place in our ministry. Thing is, some doors have to open before that's going to happen. So please pray with me that some doors on Willow Glen's site are able to happen and we're able to do some outreaches over there. Today, though, I'm most thankful for that we are debt-free. $666,000 paid off over the course of 19 years. Of course, with the interest, there was more of that. But that's a lot of money. And that's a lot of provision that God has taken care of over the years. And I'm so excited that we, as of 4 weeks ago, we are finally debt-free. So I'm going to ask Pastor Rick to come up, and we're going to get to do something that I'm sure he's been wanting to do, or wanted to do even a long time ago, right? I don't think anybody wanted to be in debt for 19 years. But eventually, we finally did get it through. So we're going to, thanks, buddy. But Rick can please come up. I have some questions before we get to burn this. But I sent these to him, so I'm not putting him on the spot, everybody. Like, he knows these questions are coming. So the first question, I'd like you to share with what was happening in the life of the church during that 2000, 2003 area. Maybe it happened a little bit before that, but led to the desire of building on to the building.
Well, when we first came here, the church was just filled with many wonderful people. And I'm kind of curious as to whether there's anyone, and I see somebody who was here then, how many were here at the original church building? Okay, I saw Virginia, so I knew she was. Okay, very good. We were loved from the very first day. And the church began to grow because people were asking other people to come. And that's very important. The church depends upon the people who make it up. And so we were coming to a point where in that little sanctuary, and it was smaller because there was a classroom at the back of that sanctuary, that I had the privilege of knocking that wall down. I was so eager. Finally, Dean Shank said, give him the sledgehammer and let him go. And we knocked that down. But we had that small sanctuary over there. And church growth people will tell you, if you reach 70 to 75% of your seating capacity, you will not grow beyond that. Well, we had gotten up to 75 to 80% for a few weeks, and then it went back down. And it stayed right around that 70 to 75%. And so we knew if we were going to grow and have a greater community outreach, that we would have to do some type of building. And so we began looking at different architects and people to draw up possibilities. And it took several years to do it. Kevin was on that group of people who saw the plans, and it was just something that blew our minds in the first place because we thought, where's the money going to come from for that? But we felt God's leadership. And with God's direction and faithful people, we started looking at the plans that would work. We went, I think last week I told you we went to Columbus, Ohio and viewed some churches. I went there thinking that we would build a dedicated sanctuary. In other words, that's all it would be used for, just worship. And that was my normal church-type thinking when I was being brought up. And when we got to one of the churches, there was so much activity going on. And we said, what's going on in the other part of the building? And they said, there's basketball, there's fellowship groups, and they were explaining, and we were talking to the pastor. And I said, well, when you built, what did you build? He said, they're in what used to be our sanctuary. And I said, well, then why did you build this? He said, people will not come to a sanctuary more than 3 times a week for the most part. Sunday morning, Sunday night, and your midweek service. He said, we didn't feel like we were utilizing the building right. And so we built a multi-purpose area, or we built a dedicated sanctuary and moved the worship to here and let the old sanctuary serve as a multi-purpose building. He said, we've got people in here every day of the week, and they come from there into the worship. But you've got to ask them. You've got to open it up for them to worship with you. And so that's what we did. We changed our plans and ideas of what we wanted to build first, and then the rest is history.
Awesome. The construction, of course, of a building can put a lot of pressure on the pastor and the people that attend. What was it like during this time for you and for Southview?
Actually, it was kind of fun for me. I got to see every day the progress that was being made. And I don't know how other people felt. There were people who were on the building committee. How many were on the building committee that's here today? Okay. All right. As we were dealing with the building, I didn't have a lot of pressure on me. We hired people to do the job, and they did the job. So I didn't have to worry about what they were doing. There were the plans. They were just to follow. I don't know how many of the people of the church felt pressure, but I didn't feel the pressure, and I'll tell you why. It was God-directed. We had prayed. We had sought the mind of the Lord. We felt that God had given us the release to go ahead and build. And Pastor Nathan talked about having the faith. We believed if God said to build, he was going to enable us to be able to build. And so we did. And really, I just had so much fun talking to some of the guys that were building the church and seeing what was coming up next, and I enjoyed it. I had never been through a building program before. I don't ever want to go through a building program again. But it was a delight to see how God met the needs of the church when people prayed and followed him.
Awesome. So kind of getting off the track of the building here, you served here for a long time, 38 years, our Southview's longest running pastor, and definitely want to see that happen again. 38 years is great. What would you say your biggest win over the years were?
This is what I wanted to ask you. What do you mean by win?
Well, that's the thing. It's open-ended, so it's more of your interpretation, I guess. You could just biggest celebration, biggest victory in ministry. It could mean a lot. So.
Okay. Here's how I'll answer that. Those of you who have heard my messages, you know what I preached. You know how I preached it. I don't think I've changed in all that time. But if anything came out of that message, if I did it right, it was this. You must surrender your life to Jesus Christ, not just for Sundays. In every day, in every way. So I'm going to tell you that anything that was accomplished here in this church was accomplished by you. The board was the representative of the local church conference. We worked together, and anything that's been done, I was not a road cowboy. I didn't have control, and I didn't dictate to other people. All the decisions that were made, and some may disagree with this, but all the decisions that were made dealing with this church were made by the board and the local church conference. I had no right to dictate, but rather I had the privilege of leading and serving. And I brought something today to kind of help answer this. This was something that yesterday Mary and I went to a meal of the church where we've been attending. And they handed these out. This is a towel. It was an appreciation meal for those who were serving in Sunday school. And I was so appreciative to receive this because it reminds me every time I look at it of why I was here, why I was anywhere, and that's to serve. I was not the leader. Jesus was. I spent a lot of time praying. My wife will tell you that there were a lot of very late nights or early mornings I spent in my office praying and seeking what God wanted. This was not my church. It's His. It was not my plans. It was His. And I am so thankful to have and blessed to have been a part of this church and to feel and see how God has blessed. And He's still blessing us today in ways that were just outstanding, miraculous for us. I'm so thankful to have had in the last years Pastor Paul McBee and Pastor Tony working with me, and it was such a blessing. When it comes to the building program, Tony was on the board as well, and I relied on him a lot. He's got the figure mind, you know. He works out figures all the time, and especially with money, too. And so I was so privileged and blessed to have them working alongside of me. But, folks, it's all in the hands of the Lord. And what I'll tell you, pick up a towel and serve Him. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying just get busy doing things. Seek His face. Completely dedicate yourself to the Lord and say, Lord, here I am. Isaiah set the pattern for us. Here I am, Lord. Use me. And God will bless the work that you do. But don't do your own thing. Do His thing. And that's what will be successful. When people and pastor together work under the direction of the Lord, the gates of hell shall not prevail against his kingdom. And I praise God that we've had the opportunity to see that happen here.
Awesome. Well, there's only one thing left to do other than eat. But these are just photocopies and resemblances of the mortgage. But we get to light this thing on fire and say goodbye to something that's been holding us back for a while.
Now, one thing we never put in was sprinklers. Just,
Trying to take the cheap way out in the building? Yes, all right. Well, let's burn these things together. So.
We got paper that won't light.
Seriously, what's this paper made of? Out. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. And we're going to sing a couple praises to him, because that's what we do, right? When we're thankful, we praise. So,
my wife is worried. She said, make sure you know what a towel is. It is Jesus. You know, I know. He used, I've read the book. He used the towel, and we need to use the towel. And for us, that towel in serving is Jesus. It's representative of what God has for us to do. And so pick up your towel.